For me, there's like a distinct first third, second third, and final third to the film, right? I, weirdly enough, love the first third of the movie because it sets up like this very, hey, this is a myth story expectation to the film, which I thought was missing from RRR, and that sort of played into my issue of sort of the action in that movie, right? In this one, it starts out like he's doing something that's already pretty impossible, which is, to climb this huge mountain. And I enjoyed that. Almost, it reminded me of like when Simba grows up, you get that sequence of like him doing the same action. He's just growing up as he's doing it, which is super cute. And I was down for that. I'm like,
that's really cool that you made that analogy, because a rumor was that apparently Rajamouli, when trying to convince Prabhas to do the movie, he was like, "You're gonna be Simba.
Yeah.
Like this is gonna be Lion King, and you're gonna be Simba and Mufasa, like in this movie." And he was like, "Oh snap, okay."
He's technically, he plays his own father, right? For me, I love that sort of setup where it's like, hey, they're already bringing in this the god Shiv into the story. You have this monumental task that's almost, only a god could do it, and then you have the very clear explanation of him being this powerful person and with this hazy background, right? So for me, I personally really enjoyed that start to the story. I do think the pacing is a bit odd in the middle third, because it ramps up so quickly with that flashback that it does question sort of where that middle third sits in this movie. It does, I don't want to say it meanders a bit, but it does go on for quite a while. And then the other thing that Rajamouli does in this movie that I don't know if I've seen of recent times, when he does the flashback, it's the flashback for quite a while. Like he doesn't disperse the flashback throughout the movie, right? Which is what I think I'm used to a lot of the times. You get these flashbacks, then you come forward, then flashback, then you come forward, right? I personally enjoyed going back and just staying back and then playing that out. I don't know if it fit sort of with where the second third of the movie was in terms of the pacing, but that final third and that just sticking to the flashback, I really loved. And it's clearly the thing that sells the movie, I think, to the masses, and it is an outlandishly amazing achievement considering the $28 million in budget that this movie had. When I initially suggested we talk about that in the sense of how does it compare to Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers, Osama, I meant it in that I think it's a crazy achievement that a movie like this can conjure up similar emotions and similar feelings of grandeur with, I don't know, what was Lord of the Rings, 100 million, something like that was the budget. So, a fourth or a third of that budget, right? So for me, the storytelling and the pacing, I love the storytelling. The pacing is a little bit wonky at times, but it is saved very much so, in my opinion, by that just bombastic, amazing third act. I'll go to you, Osama, for this one because I think I went to Vahan first for the other one.
So that's a 2 cents from you, Admir.
Yeah, it's 2 cents. Yeah, absolutely, 2 cents. Yeah.
There were a lot of great points. I think the mention of Lord of the Rings, I think this is even crazier to complete with that kind of a budget. I think they, on top of the war scenes, as you're mentioning, they had, including those and the rest of the film, there was like 90% of this film included some form of CG, and like there was a ton of VFX shots spread across like a dozen different companies or something like that. So for them to complete something like that within a couple of years is mind-blowing, within that budget as well. Something like 2,700 shots, which is like beyond obscene to complete. You also mentioned the fact that I remember when we were talking about RRR, you said it was really jarring for the film to go from like really this baked in realism perspective to switching all of a sudden from Rama becoming this god, like taking on the bow and arrow, and then just like truly evolving into this god character, and how this is the reverse for you in this film. And I think that struck me too watching this movie, because I went in with the expectation that this is going to be like action packed from the get-go. We're going to get like really engaging scenes from the beginning, and I was kind of taken aback by how slow the first third, as you mentioned, was of this film. We got an opening of a bunch of different sequences that don't really tell you what the backstory is, and so I found myself an hour into the movie still not fully understanding what's going on. I see at this point Baahubali or Shivdu, is that his name? In the first third of the movie, he's with his adoptive family, presumably, and growing up, and he's clearly this rebellious kid who's climbing this mountain. Cool, I see that story. And then I see the story of this warrior clan who we don't know who they are yet, separate story, also happening simultaneously. There's a lot of different like similarities between the two, because obviously we have the opening sequence of the mom holding the newborn baby fighting off these warriors. I'm not exactly sure who's on whose side anymore. And then we're introduced to this larger kingdom owning a bunch of slaves, very tyrannical, etc. So I'm getting introduced to so many different elements, but not necessarily able to put two and two together quite yet in the first third of the film. And then the pacing is just really slow compared to what I expected going in. And so I think this one failed in terms of the set of expectations, and that was always going to happen coming off of RRR, the biggest and most up-to-date version of what this could possibly be. We're watching this in reverse, of course. And of course, this is the first of two movies. But I think going in, seeing love stories really from the get-go, songs from the get-go, without myself understanding the weight behind them or the reason I should even care about these love stories. I think for me, one of the biggest downfalls I think of the film is the first love song where Shivdu is climbing. He finally climbs this mountain because of this this temptress that he sees in the mountain, kind of engaging him to follow different routes to get to the top of it. I understood that as a concept of his journey to get to the top of the mountain, but I didn't really understand the purpose of this like love moment when we just like went through a bunch of hardship between him and his mom, him and this like apparent hatred for gods in the beginning or something like that, like his just, I guess, like disdain for religion at the time, etc. And so I was really confused about what I should feel. Is this like meant to be a kind of rom-com fun kind of story, or is this meant to be like action-packed and serious? And so each individual thing in isolation was really fun to see, but together it created this kind of boring, slow narrative as we got into the second third. And as you mentioned, that's when things started to really ramp up all the way to the other end of the spectrum, where second, third, I'm with you. I loved the flashback just consuming the entire film. That's when everything started to make sense for me. That's when things started to become more linear, ironically, as we went back in time, as the story started to unfold. And I'm sure that's part of the direction of this film, is to say, you know, no one really knows who this guy is. He doesn't even know who he himself is.
Right.
And that'll unravel throughout the film. I felt like it just took too long to get there in a way. And we're introducing so many characters that I started to lose track of who's who and who's against who and who's like a good guy and bad guy. There's like the clear protagonist and clear villain, but all these other secondary and tertiary characters, what are they looking for again? Why is this like enslaved mother crying again? Why does she assume her son is going to come back again? How is she the mother if this other woman was carrying the baby in the beginning of the film and she got lost in this river? These kind of stories where I'm like, did I miss something? I'm not sure. And when that happens, I mean, we talked about this before, then there's a cognitive dissonance there. There's a moment where I'm like taken away from the entertainment of the moment itself, and I'm starting to like think back, do I need to rewind? Did I miss something? And no, it showed by the end of the film that was all intentional to get to this place where we can start to build the story back up from the beginning. My only criticism of that is that it probably took too long to get to that point. And so for me, the second and third acts of this film are really what made it shine. We got to the really solid pacing and even better storytelling, which is hard to do. Like when we get to you would think the beginning third of the film, because of its slow nature, would be the really storytelling heavy part of the film where we're getting most of the exposition about the storyline, and to me it was the exact opposite. The last third, where all of the action and war is actually where we're getting the most backstory, the most clear storytelling of how we got to the point that we are right now, the motivations behind each of the characters. We start to see how this really strong woman took on this kingdom and was able to rule it in what seemingly is a just way, and then she had her reasons for choosing Baahubali as the new king to lead this kingdom, and we understand the motivations behind the villain himself and his father, and those things start to clear up at the moment where we're at the most action-packed part of the film. And so for me, if that could have been replicated in the first third, and then having those same stylistic elements interspersed throughout, I would have been much happier. So for me, on the whole, I'm giving it a 2 cents, but the first third of the film is where it felt really lacking for me, and where maybe it was my tiredness, etc. I started to feel slightly bored with where the film was going, and I'm really glad that the second and third acts picked up really well, and got me right back to that place where I was excited to see what's going to happen next in the story. That's over to you, Fahad. What do you think about the pacing
So
and the
yeah, just a
storytelling?
note. If you adjust Lord of the Rings 94 million budget for inflation to 2015, it's actually 125 mil. So like
A fourth,
that's
yeah.
28 mil,
Yeah.
100. That's like 100 million difference between the budgets.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I feel like I complain a lot about certain stories not giving me enough exposition, and the early portion of this movie almost gives you a lot of exposition. And also, like, to both of your points, I feel like there's a lot of kind of running around without really telling you what's going on or what's what. I do agree with that. Like, there's parts of this movie, and for me, it's some of the placements of the songs that's kind of held back by traditional culture of what movies kind of consist of, right? As compared to him being a trailblazer, like, I'm guessing he didn't want to trailblaze everywhere on this movie, because if you see the difference in RRR, there's no point in the movie where they just randomly have a song with people that are
Right.
not in the movie. Like, I'm personally not a big fan of item songs in like Bollywood or generally like Eastern culture. I'm not a big fan of a dancer being in the movie just dancing just because of the way she looks without her actually being in the movie. Like, it's not even any relationship. Like, she's literally just dancing. Like, when they go to like that Singapore basically, right? Where
Right.
they to hunt the spy, right? And they just have a random like song. In that moment, I'm like, this could cut the kind of tension that you're trying to
Yeah.
create
Yeah.
for an audience that not necessarily might be used to like this version of film, right? Like, that could create certain pacing issues. And it's the same thing with like him kind of climbing over and them creating like this kind of almost out of place thing, because soon you're about to see his mother like enslaved for 25 years. Like, that's a very difficult scene for me to like come back into when you're showing this other stuff. But having said all of that, I do think, although that's a little bit extra in certain situations, I think this movie also gives me enough where I can't complain about the fact that it didn't give me enough information. Where I might even know too much at this point. Like you can kind of see this with RR2. This guy seems to be like a big fan of holding cards that he'll just play at random times. That'll be a twist. They'll take you like the fact that that's his aunt still isn't technically revealed, but once you realize, oh, these are the dads and this woman died, so you got to do the math. The movie doesn't really tell you that outright, so it holds a lot of cards. Basically, we'll eventually talk about the ending, which is him also holding a card. Like, he constantly just seems to be like, okay, I'm about to like shock you again. So while you're trying to do that, if you have pacing issues, it creates like kind of problems, right? In terms of kind of keeping the audience interested. But I was like a massive, like 300 was a very fair point. Like, I was a massive fan of the end sequences of the film of both him and his cousin. And that's kind of like the funny part too, how although the cousin is supposed to be the villain, Rajamouli is still giving him enough respect to, although like his view is ass, like he's clearly a shitty person, but he still gets like the cool chariot. Like, he still gets like some cool sequences of him also killing dudes, although he might be killing less people or be more like merciless than his the dude that's gonna become king, but he has like a different aspect to it. But it's 2 cents for me, but I do think that's what I kind of mentioned earlier, where you can see little things where he grew. Like, the songs aren't enough of a bad point for me to ding him like a lot on it, but it's still like the stuff needs to fit in the story. Now, if it's like, oh, these are like two undercover police detectives that are going to hunt like a criminal or some shit, and they happen to be at a nightclub, and then someone's dancing in the background, that's different. Here, it just seems like very convenient that this would happen, and two princes who have never been out are all of a sudden like out dancing and doing all sorts of weird shit that we've never seen them do any of that in the rest of the film. But yeah, 2 cents for me, but I do think that you see him improve a lot in the movie that came out in March, which is amazing. I love it when like a director grows over time instead of being stubborn, not naming any names.
And he's been doing this for a while. I think Baahubali was like his 11th or 12th film, and
So the
since then
fact
he's made
that
quite a few.
and the fact that and even in RRR, like probably his 14th, 15th film, that's if your best project is your last project and you've been working for like 20
Yeah.
kind of years,
Killing it,
that's
killing it.
massive. And even saying that, I'm sure people will contest like, well, Bahubali 2 has the biggest box office, so you can't say RRR is the best project, but RRR in terms of like international like reception,
It'll get there. It'll also get there.
it's so big, and I'm sure Netflix is a scheming organization. They'll eventually release it in limited release in theaters to make more money off of it, because I'm sure they bought the rights off of it for Western audiences. But yeah,
Speaking of
that's-
which,
that's what I
I saw the film in Tamil. I didn't get a chance. For some reason, I couldn't find the like the Telugu version of it. I don't know which versions either of you
I
saw,
watched
if
the
you know.
Hindi. I watched the Hindi version of it because
Yeah.
I understood the Hindi. That's why it
Okay.
made sense to me. And the thing is, you're right. There's 3 versions of the film on Netflix, and the poster for all 3 of them look the same. You need to click
Yeah.
on it and read which
like,
language
read.
it is. Yeah, because I was just
And
I'm not
actually,
gonna
things
do
like 4 or
Tamil.
5 actually.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
originally filmed in
Telugu, I
both
think.
Tamil and Telugu.
Yeah.
No, Tamil. Is it?
Tamil
yeah.
is Telugu. Tamil is Telugu, I think.
And Malayalam.
Yes,
Right, something.
yes.
And then like dubbed maybe in Hindi and another.
Yes, but
language.
with the same, just like with RRR, someone mentioned that in the comments. It's with the same actors. It's not someone else that dubbing did. So the actors technically are speaking 2, 3, 4 languages just to kind of do this. While our boy Vin Diesel collects checks for saying 3 words.
That's another thing you gotta give props for. It's not just like the languages, but they also are dedicated to the physicality of what's required in the films. They're dedicated to the dancing, everything else. So like to be a Bollywood, Tollywood star, you have to be like ridiculously multifaceted, and we like praise dudes like Tom Cruise that are super
Yeah.
rare here in America for doing that. But there's gotta
Yeah.
be like credit given to these guys in the East who like as a base requirement have to have like 5 different skills.
Exactly. Yeah. No.
That's a good point
Admire.
on the song placements and sort of
Because I know that
even-
that's something that like I would see you thinking that,
yeah.
but you're
Yeah.
gonna give it leash because you're gonna be like, I don't want to be an asshole and like not want to sound like
Bleep that. No,
right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
that could be
absolutely.
crazy if you beep
He's
that.
in your head.
While-
No,
while, like-
it's weirdly enough, I felt like the chaos, if you will, or the uncertainty of the beginning of not knowing where things are headed was fine with me. I don't understand Telugu, obviously. But sonically, I appreciated the songs a little bit more, I think, than in RRR, even if their placement was a little bit
Yes.
odd.
Yeah. The songs
Uh,
themselves
Yeah.
were
Sound,
objectively better.
at least better
the songs
to me.
themselves were
So
objectively better. Yes.
yeah, so I guess that's where the leash comes from. And I don't know, they didn't feel like they happened all that often. It's really the 2.
Yes, I really
that stand
appreciate
out.
that because I'm like,
Yeah.
once the war starts, if there's a song, I'm gonna tear my hair off, and that didn't happen. Like they had lit like background,
Yeah.
like kind of like theme music. Like there's an amazing
yeah.
score behind the actual
Yeah.
film, but I did like kind of the score at the end when they're like fighting in the war.